Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the Timelines podcast. It's been a while since I've had time to sit down and make another one for these for you guys, and I'm super excited about today's guest from Frett Co Clockworks. If you are looking for the most beautiful refurbished pocket watches or pocket watch conversions on the market, then you're going to love today's episode. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show Mr. Brendan Frett.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Michael. So, my name is Brendan Frett, and I am the founder and watchmaker at Frett Co Clockworks. And we are a small batch custom pocket watch and conversion company located in Little Rock, Arkansas.
I appreciate that introduction because I was about to say for anybody who has not yet heard of your company, if you could give us a little elevator pitch. So that was a perfect way to start us off.
All right, that's a good way to start.
Exactly. So what I love most about what you do is taking pocket watches and making them wearable for today. I think a lot of times when people think of a pocket watch conversion, they think of something kind of crudely soldered together, or maybe there's no real value or logical value in wearing it because, oh, it's a conversion. But the people that say that obviously have not seen the kinds of watches and conversions that you guys do over there. So as somebody who we sell a lot of pocket watches here at the Watch Preserve, and as somebody like me who's still kind of learning about the amazing world that pocket watches have to offer, I think that you guys offer something really unique for the market. And I'm just curious, like how you started in this very, very niche little corner of the watch world. I think on your bio on the website it says that you're a scientist originally by trade, so there was probably already some sort of interest in small workings.
Yeah, no, of course. And for me, the whole world of watchmaking kind of opened up when I got my great grandfather's pocket watch from the 1800s. So I inherited that, and I was about, I think maybe 10. It was in the late 90s. I was born in 1987, and the fact that something that old could still work and still do the you know tell time, it serves the same purpose today as it did in the 1800s, was kind of, I mean, mind blowing to me. And that kind of planted the seed of being interested in watches, but more particularly in vintage American timepieces. And ever since that happened, right, we've always had that type of interest in vintage American watchmaking. So
Nice.
that was kind of
I
the
Yeah, I think that's such a common trend with a lot of people that I end up talking to on the show is that sort of that early like foundational connection to something mechanical. And I think what you touched on is really interesting, that it does the same thing today that it did in the 1800s. And
yeah, I
I think
don't
that's such a beautiful way of like wrapping that up, that that machinery is still functional and beautiful and perfect.
yeah, I can't think of anything back then other than the like a timepiece that still has the same function today, that can still be used today for the same reason it was used in the early 1800s. So it's pretty crazy. And so yeah, that really got me fascinated in it.
Nice. And so talk to me a little bit about your personal background. Are you from Arkansas originally? Did you go to school to study science or something?
So yes, I am from Chicago originally. So I
Okay.
was born and raised. Well, anyone that says they're from Chicago is probably not from the actual city, from a suburb. So I'm from Evanston, which is the suburb
Okay.
just north of Chicago. So I was born and raised there, and I went to school to study medicinal chemistry. So I actually have a PhD in medicinal chemistry, and that gets into like the same part of my brain that's interested in watches, because studying how drugs work and kind of how they interact at specific receptors, and how they can help treat different types of disease. And in that process of learning about the science part, right, it's still is kind of engaging that same creative kind of tinkering, because I do a lot of work in labs, I have a research program. So during the day, I'm more of like science teaching and doing research, and then I moonlight as a watchmaker at night. to kind of balance the different ways that I can use my creativity and tinkering.
Mhm. Nice. Do you know Jarrett Harkness from Unwind in Time?
No, I do not know him.
He spent several years as a pharmacist, actually. So maybe you guys should connect and talk
So
about some parallels.
that's very it's hidden close to home because I'm a faculty member in the College of Pharmacy here in Little Rock at the
Oh, great.
hospital. So I teach PharmD students. So it's kind of funny that got that pharmacist. So there is big interplay between science and watchmaking because I mean, for me, right, watchmaking is kind of two things. It's physics and chemistry, and they're kind of working together, especially when you're thinking about it from like a restoration component, like a standpoint.
Sure. That's really interesting point that you just brought up because I've talked to a couple watchmakers, and I don't think anybody has really drawn a parallel. A lot of people will talk about physics or mathematics, but they don't bring in the chemistry side, which I think is a really interesting point that you bring up. So for you, I mean, as not a watchmaker myself, I mean, something that would come to mind would be the first thing would maybe be lubrication, the interaction of, how the chemicals and the lubricant work and to keep everything loosey goosey in the movement. The thermal heat coloring that you guys do, definitely for sure. But talk to me a little bit more about how chemistry pulls into watchmaking.
Yeah, so it's more so in like the restoration process, like removing corrosion from a watch movement that wasn't really taken great care of, or was.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people that, I mean, smoking was big back in the day. So in people that like watchmakers that were smoking, a lot of the movement picks up those chemicals and it tarnishes it. And coming up with different ways that you're able to remove that tarnish without removing like the underlying movement decoration takes a lot of chemistry because you want to be able to remove the damaged layer, right? That from time just patinaed or however it
Hmm.
was taken care of, and not remove any of like the beautiful the Geneva Damascening, or I call it Damascening, patterns on the movement. Also with like the jewel settings, they're brass, and brass over time will patina, and coming up with a way to kind of remove the corrosion on the brass so you're able to kind of showcase the brilliant like glow of the jewel settings that they when it was first manufactured, coming up with ways to kind of make the movement, I guess, look more like it did when it left the factory. Takes a lot of chemistry, and then obviously the thermal coloring is a whole nother thing that is essentially with heat you're inducing a chemical reaction on the face of the metal to cause it to change color. So there's a lot
Are,
of chemistry involved.
are some of these techniques, obviously thermal coloring has been around in the watch industry for a long time, but are some of these techniques like specifically for restoration on the brass components or the jewels to bring back that original luster and color? Are some of these techniques things that you have sort of come up with your own process for, or are you building on the people that came before?
So I guess the big problem with like the vintage American, there is guidance, but most of it is blogs, and you're reading about other people's techniques that they've used. So I kind of see what people have been trying, and then with my own experience, because for the research component at when I'm a scientist during the day. I guess I'm a scientist all the time, but during the
Hmm.
day, a lot of the work that I do is like organic chemistry based. So we are like building different types of new drugs to test, and so I have a pretty good understanding of chemicals in general. And using some of the information that I get online, I can come up with ways to, like, for instance, remove tarnish from a plate. And I think I have some a lot of before and after pictures on our Instagram, and then also on our website, where you can remove tarnish, and the movement looks brand new, where you don't have any type of issue with removing the part of the movement that you want to come out again. And so a lot of it has been trial and error.
Hmm.
But we have it down, well, I guess, for lack of a better word, to a science at this point.
Yeah, that's great. Have you ever thought about like kind of packaging any of that up and offering it to other watchmakers, or do you want to kind of keep it proprietary?
So yeah, we don't have a problem, telling people how we do restorations and stuff. Because the technique of the like that you use during the process is more important than I think what you're using to do the restoration. So it's not just dip it in this for 5 minutes, take it out, it's good to go, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of technique involved in the process, especially for the thermal coloring component. It's not easy to get that color to be uniform because these pieces are all of the screws and hardware, they're centuries old.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of, I guess, uh, technique that you have to learn, even if you know the process.
So in regards to technique, then obviously you have the background to understand the chemistry and the chemical components behind the restoration process. But how did you learn the watchmaking components? Did you go to watchmaking school?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I actually started when I was in grad school. Started to really get involved in the watchmaking component. So I would take apart, watches that I own, learn really how they work, put them back together. I wouldn't recommend it because it's not the most cost efficient way to learn watchmaking. And then what I then started to look at, was okay, you have your great grandfather's pocket watch. Uh, let's kind of focus on American vintage, partially because it's pretty easy to get different types of movements, right? Because they were all made in the states, and they're all over the place, so they're not hard to get.
Hmm.
So it's something that you can easily obtain parts for. And I really wanted to learn kind of the process behind restoring and servicing vintage American. And so I was able to kind of hone my technique in that area, and that's kind of where the whole thermal coloring component came, because a lot of these vintage American movements are very beautiful, but I'm not saying they're flat, but some of the like Swiss movements, like the vintage Swiss, they have a lot of thermal colored parts.
Hmm.
And so I kind of wanted to incorporate that into these American vintage pieces. And that's kind of where the whole thermal coloring component of kind of I guess maybe our brand kind of started. Um,
Yeah, I'd say across the stuff that you have available, I think the consistency, well, consistency and variance, I guess, of the different sort of colors that you can pull out and really just make these movements pop from a visual perspective is certainly probably, I would imagine, the calling card of your company.
yeah, so and I guess one issue that we ran into early on, and this was before because the I was doing this long before we formalized the company. I say we because my wife and I started this together
Oh, great.
during, well, it was in April of 2020. We know
There you go. Yeah,
we know kind of what happened then, and
yeah.
kind of how social distancing and working remotely, how that impacted your your psyche. So
Hmm.
we try to distract ourselves as best as possible. So we thought it was a good time to kind of formalize that company, and we decided for the name. It's kind of a funny story. I wanted to incorporate. This is back to the thermal coloring. I wanted to incorporate that into the name of the company, and I came up with a terrible name. It was called Plum Horology, and plum because that's the hardest. Like that plum color is the hardest one to hit when you're thermally
Hmm.
coloring something. My wife was pretty smart and said, "No, that's not good. Let's do Frett Co Clockworks." And I was like, "Yeah, that probably is a better call."
Plum
So
watchmaking. That makes me seem like a
it's
Clue spin-off or something. You know,
yeah,
Professor
it's
Plum
not.
is bent over the bench. You know.
You can convince yourself you have a good idea if you don't get input from someone else. So
100%, man.
it's
Yeah.
But I think back to showcasing the movement with pocket watches. I think since you guys deal in a lot of this stuff, one of the problems with them is that they don't have a case back that is see through, right?
Hmm.
They're all solid. And that was done by design because these watches weren't meant, I mean, they're beautiful, but they were meant to tell time, like back in the
Yeah.
day. And it was, dusty and, a lot of elements that these pieces were exposed to. So they had those solid case backs to protect them. But we wanted to come up with a way that these movements could easily be enjoyed. And so at the very beginning, when we were doing this, we were using pocket watches that were cased in salesman cases. And so these were the types of cases that watch salesmen would have that were able to show the back of the movement because it was glass instead of solid metal. And so salesmen would show this to a customer so they could see the movement easily. And then when they would buy the piece, right, it would come with that solid case back so the movement's protected. And so we were able to start to case these pieces still as pocket watches, but with see-through case backs. So you're really able to enjoy the beauty of the movement, especially with all the thermal coloring. And at that time, we're kind of posting a lot of stuff onto Reddit. And that's really where the you know early part of the company really started to pick up traction. And I'm really
Hmm.
fortunate for the community on Watch Exchange. I'm not sure if you're ever on that. They love vintage American and very supportive of what we're doing. And it's a great place to pick up pieces for your any type of watch. Had great experience on that.
Sure.
And
That's
then
go ahead.
oh, I mean, I feel like I'm. You can ask a question. I feel like I'm talking too much.
I was just wondering, I was wondering this as you were mentioning the Reddit community. Um, what you guys do is so beautiful, but it's also like very niche in a way. So what is, could you just tell me kind of what most of your clientele are like? Are they sort of people that are already in the watch space and just looking for something really unique, or do you have people coming from the
So
outside
kind of
world?
all over the place,
Hmm.
right? And I think this gets back to just like what you said at the beginning is like the interest in mechanics and uh, how something like a watch that is very intricate, right, in all the components that have to move in sync, and pretty much it gives you a boring output. It just tells you what time it is.
Yeah.
And so the fact that all those gears and everything is moving in sync to produce just to tell you the time, I think captivates a lot of people. Like there is a big like when electronics were coming out, like there is a big push for digital timekeeping devices, and they're great. I mean, I have a smartwatch. I use that when I run, but there's a big, I think, not necessarily going backwards in time, but I think there's a lot of interest now in recapturing kind of like mechanical devices, like um, from all different types of, I guess, areas or perspectives, and people like the pieces just because of their history, right? Because
Yeah.
they're vintage American. Most people don't realize that the states were doing this type of incredible watchmaking, and plus all the mechanics and the interworkings. I think that's captivating. A lot of people say, "Can you case these watches backwards?" I'm more interested in looking at the movement than the time. So,
I love that. You're absolutely right, man. I think because here, at the Watch Preserve too, like it is kind of a split of people that are, very much into the watch space, and they're like, oh, I've got a big collection, and I would just need a vintage Omega or a Hoyer or whatever, like the enthusiasts. But then there are people that are just like, I just like this because this is cool and it's unique and it doesn't look like the same watch that that guy over there is wearing. And I think you're right that I mean, we in the watch space have kind of known this for a while, like the romance and the history behind these pieces, and that's why we love them. But it is kind of cool to see that appreciation of the history and the mechanics sort of spread beyond our little corner of the internet. And it's great that you're seeing that in your area as well, because you wouldn't always think of, pocket watch conversions being something that maybe somebody who's not even really into watches would go for. But the fact that you're able to take these historic pieces and give them a new life and bring them to new kinds of customers is amazing.
Yeah, I think for like the new customer base, the hardest part for us was coming up with a way to make these conversions wearable. Um, and I think like a what like you said in the beginning, where you think like a pocket watch conversion is like the original pocket watch case with lugs soldered on, and I mean it looks cool and rugged, but if you're not really into that, then it might be hard to capture other watch enthusiasts that are more modern, that want some
Hmm.
like a more modern profile for a timepiece, not to wear the you know pocket watch case that has lugs soldered on.
Yeah,
And so the
absolutely.
hardest.
And I was just gonna say, I just pulled up your website just so I could have a visual reference. And I mean, just I would encourage everybody who's going to listen to this to absolutely check out your inventory because it's so elegant. The way you do the lugs that you have are beautiful. I mean, I'm looking at stuff like you've got a 1939 Hamilton 917, and with the 12 o'clock crown. But the very elegant, very slender. Are they flexible lugs that you put on the cases?
So that was a very important component to our design, for these pocket watch cases, or for these conversion cases, was that the movements for pocket watches were meant to be cased in a pocket watch case and worn in your
Yep.
pocket. So there wasn't really an effort to keep the size of these things slim. And so those, like the lugs on these cases, are kind of serve two purposes. The first purpose is you can access the crown, right? Because you can push the lugs down and then you can wind and set easily. And
Hmm.
the other purpose of this is that the lugs will adjust to your wrist. And so the profile of the piece will conform to the profile of your wrist. And so people are really blown away when they put these on, where it wears more like a 40 millimeter compared to the 44. Like the lug
Yeah.
to lug at the lowest position is 47 millimeters, which is the lug to lug of like a typical dive watch. That's
Yeah,
40
I was gonna
millimeters.
say, yeah, 47 mil, that's like a Zodiac's 47
It
millimeters. A lot of
is,
some of the Tudor stuff is like, yeah, that's very, very wearable.
and these
It's
cases
yeah.
they're designed to be simple and elegant.
Hmm.
So you're really just the movement and the dial take center stage, and really that's the most important part to these things, right? Because people aren't buying them for the case; they're buying them for the history of the movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a favorite, like you've got Elgin, you've got Hamiltons and stuff. Do you have a favorite manufacturer that you think is or just the best looking or the most fun to work on?
So that's a very hard question. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Choose a baby and which one is
so
is your
yeah,
favorite, right?
yeah, no. So we have three dogs and two cats. So it's like pick your favorite. I mean, they have pros and cons for
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
but no one's favorite. Love them all. But I think for me that really comes down to where I was born and like the history of
Yeah, Chicago,
where I
yeah.
grew up,
Hmm.
and so I think I am drawn to a manufacturer that was kind of like it was like a side business of Illinois. It's called Burlington.
I don't know them.
And so they were headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. And when you look at their movements, typically under the balance, it says Burlington and then Chicago, Illinois on it. And so having that, you know, added to the movement, it just makes it kind of makes me like feel connected to it, right? Since I grew up
Yeah.
there. So I really like that watchmaker in particular, just because of the history and where I grew up. But for I'm trying to think. I don't necessarily have like a favorite brand. I do have watches that I enjoy working on more, and those are going to be the ones that are more rare that you don't come across too often.
Yeah.
And just but I think the fun part for me with these pocket watches and restoring them and working on them is that each one is like a unique puzzle, because each piece, like there were manufacturing tolerances back then that weren't great. So a lot of these pieces, you know, are kind of unique just based on the fact that this is a little bit too small, or this is a little bit too large, or the jewel has been specifically made for that part. And when you put all that together, like when you're trying to service and restore it, and if it's not running, you kind of have to go through like a series of steps, and each watch will have like a unique problem that you have to figure out is the issue that's causing
Hmm.
it to have low amplitude, or wow, this is really out of beat. I'm not sure if you work on watches, but these timepieces, the vintage ones, have banking pins that you can adjust.
Hmm.
Nowadays, right, that's set, but because the jewels, when they're set, like the palette fork, can have some variation. You have to actually adjust the banking pin so the escapement ticks properly. So there's a lot of little finesse involved in these pieces, and so that's always been real fun for us because each one's like a little puzzle. And so back to your question about which brand I like the most, I really can't decide. Like I said, Burlington, just because of the historical aspect of growing up in the same city that was made. But really, in general, I go for more so rarity of the movement rather than brand.
Yeah. I think that's a really sensible answer, and I think that's, like you were talking about, getting into this whole world, um, kind of bringing it back home for you, and that sentimentality and meaning behind it is really nice.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that's
you
like the
have a
most.
That's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
It just,
So
if you don't love
have
it,
it
why are you
have that
doing it?
connection to it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's one watch that I just keep looking at on your website, and it's the 48 millimeter Howard driver conversion, because that movement with that like the triple bridge is just like, oh my gosh, just
So
gorgeous.
yes, I would say, when you're looking at like American watchmakers, Howard was like the bougie watchmaker. They
Yeah.
they typically had solid gold cases. All of their movements were really high end, just incredibly decorated, um, and kind of like pretty like their clientele were kind of like
Upper
the
crust kind of guys. Yeah.
aristocrats. Like yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
and those movements, they're fun to work on. But the problem I have with them is that it's sometimes hard to find parts for them since they didn't make as much as some of the other manufacturers. And
Sure.
so we do convert like Howards like that occasionally, but we typically focus on pieces that have parts available, right? So down the line, as things wear out, like you can enjoy this conversion typically indefinitely because there's so many parts
Hmm.
available. But Howard does bring in like the just unbelievable manufacturing and stuff. So there is that component. Um, but we typically try to stay with pieces that have you know parts available, so it can be repaired and serviced. Because you don't want to purchase a conversion and then down the line, oh, these parts don't exist anymore, right? You want to make
Yep.
sure that it's able to be in service just about indefinitely. Yeah, so we try to focus on pieces that have available parts.
Sure. So I guess with the parts conversation in mind, could you walk me through, like, how do you decide which pocket watches you want to do conversions of? Are you sort of always just have like kind of a back stock, and whatever is in the nicest condition you just start with first, or are there certain sort of grades that you're like looking for to make into a conversion?
So yeah, that's a good question, and that becomes a potential issue when you're thinking about the initial design of the pocket watch, where it was designed to stay stationary in a pocket, and then obviously on your wrist, there's a lot more positional variance. And so what we found is that you want to have a movement with at least 15 joules and up
Hmm.
in order for that to maintain accuracy in a variety of different positions. And so for our conversions, they're all going to have movements with that amount of joules or higher, because those seem to perform the best. And when it comes to like a movement that would work well for a conversion, obviously condition's important. So we like to source like the top 5%. If the movement is a little bit corroded, we can typically fix that, but we always like to start with the best condition we can find. And that's typically, you know, I would say the dial might be a little bit more important because we don't really do any refinish dials. That's not the type of work that we really
Hmm.
like to focus on because I don't think, you know, if you refinish a dial, you're kind of removing kind of the history of the dial because you're starting from scratch essentially. It's the same metal plate,
Yeah.
but like, um, and so yeah, we try to work on movements that are in pretty good condition. And we also get, you know, we've gotten good at, you know, kind of just from a visual inspection saying, okay, this piece is missing. It looks like this was tinkered with, you know, this, you know, hobbyist leave a lot of screwdriver marks, and so you can
Yep.
tell if it you can tell if it was properly serviced or wasn't taken care of well.
Yeah.
And obviously the ones that weren't taken care of well might be better served as a parts movement because we can't
Hmm.
really remove you know, dings in a movement that were caused by a screwdriver slipping, right? Those scratch marks are typically permanent at that point. So really prioritize condition first before anything else. And uh, also with the jewel count being at least 15 and or up, just for, you know, to have maintained performance when that watch is on the wrist.
Yeah, a lot of the lower jewel stuff, even with, services, they just don't typically run well anyway.
Yeah,
So,
and it's metal on metal contact for a lot of,
yeah.
you know, for the parts that are spinning, you know, at a higher rate. And so over time it erodes and you can't just replace the jewel, right? You kind of have to put in a new bushing or something.
Hmm.
And that's just not, I just don't think that's a great piece to be used on the wrist just because of all the potential issues with performance.
Sure. So we've talked we've mentioned it a couple times, but I feel like we should talk about your thermal coloring process
Sure.
because that is kind of the calling card and we've been sort of teasing at it. So you are able, most people think of thermal bluing, probably, we lok at the heat blued hands and screws and on some of the finer Swiss stuff that's out there. Um, but you can get a whole range of colors, which you don't see a lot of in the watchmaking world. So how did you start? I guess did you sort of decide like, oh, hey, I'm really good at this, or I turned out to be really good at this, and we're just going to do that on every watches, or like how did that sort of become one of your main things that you do?
So I think, I mean, it was just tinkering, right? And saying, oh, let's try this. And it really kind of pulled in elements from like the Swiss pocket watches that we saw, where, you know, the screws a lot of times are plum or blue. And I was like, interesting. So I wonder if, you know, these American pieces would be able to blue the same. And took a screw and, you know, started to heat it up. And I was like, oh, wow, it changed colors really fast. Because if you heat it up too fast, like it just goes, you know, to colorless eventually because the
Hmm.
transition for colors is pretty narrow in temperature.
Sure.
And I was like, okay, I wonder if this is possible to kind of do more like slower, so we're able to capture those differences in color as the temperature increases. So we were able to start to incorporate, like for hands, for instance, we do the thermal coloring using brass shavings over a heat source, so we have better control of the heat. So you're able to heat the part up very slow because you only have like it's between 500 and 550 Fahrenheit are all the different colors that you see. So you
Wow.
see at the lower temperatures, it's typically like a hayish gold color. As you
Hmm.
increase that, it gets to be plum, like purplish plum, and then a little bit higher, it starts to be blue. And then if you go too high, it kind of turns to like a ice blue, almost back to the original steel color. And so we just kind of were, you know, experimenting
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you know, just like I would in a research setting in my lab, coming up with different ways that we were able to capture these colors. And so I think the kind of the most interesting part about this is that it's not done automation, right? This is all done by hand. Obviously, I'm not putting my hands into the flame. There's tweezers or brass
Sure.
shavings involved, right? But all of this is done piece by piece, screw by screw, part by part, and so that's kind of interesting because it then makes each piece unique, right? Not only is
What
it
is the
unique.
what does it actually look like your actual heating setup? You mentioned you were heating the part over brass shavings, so do you have like an open flame? But like I can't picture it in my head what it looks like.
Yeah, yeah. So it is like a ethanol lamp or like a open
Okay.
flame, right? Because you
Hmm.
want something, you can't burn it over like a fire because there's smoke. So you need to have a
Yeah.
clean heat source like that that's not generating soot or anything like that, because that would probably go onto the part.
Yeah.
And then for the brass shavings, right, they're inside a container, kind of like you're boiling water, and
Hmm.
instead of water, you have brass shavings as like the uniform way to transfer the heat.
Okay.
And you hold that over a heat source so the brass shavings heat up slowly and uniform. And so the part on top of that will heat up slowly and uniform. Because, like for a hand, right, a lot of these hands are pretty elegant. And so if you're not able to uniformly heat that up, half of it will be blue, half of it will be hay, half of it will be plum. And
Yeah.
so it won't, it'll look funny. And so we've just uh, kind of honed our technique in being able to uniformly like heat up pieces like hands or the regulators so it's uniform blue or uniform plum, right? So it looks beautiful, and then it kind of accentuates the movement components and puts in a lot of contrast.
You know what this really reminds me of? And this is such a weird comparison that only my brain would ever make. Did you ever watch Chef's Table on Netflix?
Yes, I've seen this.
Did you know the guy in Australia who cooks everything over a wood fire? And then when he can do like caviar that he cooks over, he'll break down, the embers and get the heat really low and even to ensure like even cooking on really delicate ingredients. That's exactly like the same
It
method
is
that you're
it
working
it
on.
is very similar, right? I
Yeah.
mean, and so you're correct where you need to have complete control of that heat source, or
Yeah.
else you'll ruin caviar, or you'll you know make the movement or make that piece look a little bit, I would say, off. If it's
Yeah,
not
you
uniform,
guys
that
are
the
the
colors will
you
be
guys are
off.
the caviar of pocket
Caviar or
watches.
something,
So how
something
long does
like
that
that.
process take? Like on a average pocket watch movement, I mean, how many screws, how many parts are you doing? What's that timeline look like?
So, like, the actual coloring of the piece is probably 10% of the timeline. It's
Mm-hmm.
90% preparation. Because the screws over time, some of them will tarnish, right? Or, they'll get different types of oils on them. They need to be polished
Yeah.
first. They need to be completely clean. And so that can sometimes take a long time just to make sure the component is properly prepped. Um, so there's not like a specific time that you would allocate to like refinishing or adding the thermal coloring, because each movement will have like a set number of parts, and it will vary from movement to movement. Not everything can be colored. It really depends on the iron content of that metal
Hmm.
component. But I mean, I would say like the preparation is going to be the longest, uh, work, or taking the most time, because if it's not properly prepared and when you heat it, it'll not come out great. It'll color without uniform, or like one part of it will color or heat up way too fast compared to the others, or like the oil on it can add stains as you're trying to heat
Sure.
up that part. So it's really the prep, and then patience with the coloring component, because you really want to have complete control of that heat source.
It really, I mean, the more that you talk about it, I can only imagine how much trial and error went into learning
And
how this whole process changes from grade to grade.
so the yes, there is a lot of trial and error, and even at this point, there is still, oh, this, didn't turn out great. Let's uh, re-prepare this, right? Because the thermal coloring is reversible, um, and that's actually pretty important to us because we don't ever want to permanently change these movements, and
Mm,
so we kind of think of like thermal coloring as like makeup, right? So you can remove the thermal color, so it's not permanent. And that's a good thing because sometimes for the specific part, if it doesn't turn out great, we're able to remove the thermal coloring because it's just a layer of iron oxide. So we
sure.
can remove the oxide and then start from scratch. So we can do this multiple times. And in the beginning, we were definitely not, I would say, not well versed in controlling temperature and being able to get the correct colors. So we did spend a lot of time re-preparing these parts, and then that was also a blessing in disguise because it also kind of helped us develop new techniques to prepare these parts properly, so they had the best
Yeah,
thermal coloring when we actually went to that step.
nice. Are there any movements like that you just would love to work on and convert? Like, I don't know if that kind of applies in your space, but do you have like holy grail pieces? You're like, oh, I want to make that movement look so much better, or convert that.
So there wouldn't be any particular movement, but we do love working on brands like Elgin that they produced a lot of watches, right? I think they're produced maybe like 50 million in their watchmaking in the states. So we get really excited when we're able to get our hands on a piece from a company like that has that they made less than 5,000 for that particular model,
Mm, hmm.
right? Because it's kind of like super unique for that brand. Other types of you know watch companies maybe didn't produce as much, um, or they might not have had as unique like minimal manufacturing numbers. But Elgin, if you're able to get your hands on some of the movements that had much lower manufacturing numbers, we get excited for that, right? Because it's kind of a unique part of that company. So we have one that we're working on now that I think maybe they was like 5,000 made.
Well,
And so it's real pretty. It has, I think it's 21 jewels, and it has a safety barrel. So the barrel is different from a typical American barrel. And so we kind of like working on movements that are more unique, that have like different, I guess I wouldn't necessarily call it a complication, but they're put together differently than the typical American vintage timepiece. Because those are
sure.
always fun.
Yeah. Do you have any big upcoming things? Like, where do you want to see your company in the next 5 years?
So what we're trying to do now is finalize new case designs that are smaller than 44 millimeters. And so this year, what we're doing, we are going to be releasing cases that are 40 and also 36. And so
Wow. Okay.
the 40 millimeters will be, I'm not sure if you're familiar with pocket watch sizes, but
Hmm.
they'll be for watches that are the six size. And
Yeah.
then the 36 will be watches that are zero size.
Nice.
Um, we'll never stop with the 44 because those are 12, and
Yep.
the 12 size movements are similar to the 16S, where there's a lot more variety and a lot more, let's say, differences in how the movements are put together. Once you get a little bit smaller, the movements are more uniform, in like that 6S and 0S size,
Hmm.
right? But the trade off then at that point is that you have a much more compact conversion. And so we're really trying to focus on making people appreciate American conversions and not like you have an arm clock, where it's something in like a unique movement, but in a profile that everybody can enjoy. And so people
Yeah.
love. I personally like the 44 the best, just because the adjustable lugs make it really easy to wear, and then you get a lot of variety in movements. But uh, the 40 millimeter one, I think, will capture a lot of those people that are hesitant to wear like a 44 millimeter profile. So they're still able to enjoy a conversion in like a footprint that is elegant and more compact.
Yeah, it's something that they're familiar with too. I feel like you'll probably get a lot of people that their first purchase might be something that is the six size, and then they'll have that for a little bit, and they'll say, well, let's just get this 44 millimeter one. The movement's way cooler.
And that's always, I mean, people are a little bit hesitant, but we always get the comment from happy customers that, wow, I've never had a 44 that fit this well. um,
Sure.
and so we love that because it was designed for that exact purpose, where you can take a relatively bigger movement, and put it in a profile where a typical 44 or like a modern 44 would wear much larger.
Yeah.
And then another thing that we're probably have this finished in the next month or two. We're going to introduce a new metal with the 44s. We're going to start to do them in bronze.
Oh, that'll be cool.
And so, yeah, because you'll have, the bronze will age over time, right? It'll
Hmm.
patina. And so it's really capturing that vintage aesthetic. So I think that'll look real nice. With the vintage movement, with the patinaed case over time, I think it'll really look good.
Yeah, I can only imagine too once you start getting some color on the case, how that plays with the different thermal coloring you've put onto the movement. I think there's going to be some really pretty combinations there.
Yeah, it'll be, yeah, completely different like feel and appearance. Because right now we use stainless, and stainless
Hmm.
steel's right. That's a great material. We use a 316L, so it's really sturdy. It's really resistant to scratches. It's a tough metal.
Hmm.
And the silver color is beautiful, right? Because it doesn't really it's soft, right? The movement's the thing that's going to be captured. But with the bronze case, it's going to give it a completely different feel, right?
Yeah,
And
that'll
so
be exciting.
it'll have a different wrist profile. We're going to have some fun strap combinations to really play off that bronze. And so I think we'll have some pretty cool conversions coming out in those cases.
Sure. Yeah, I'm totally looking forward to those. Do you have a kind of a estimated release time for those?
So that will probably be this year in the next 3 months.
Okay.
We are still, because it's a new material, so
Hmm.
we know how to work well with stainless steel. We just don't want to put something out that's not as durable as our typical 44.
Sure.
So we're still finalizing everything, but in about 3 to 4 months, you should start seeing people should start seeing some conversions in bronze.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, we're definitely. I would love to. Little Rock's not that far away. I could totally drive out
It's
there. We could do a
because
highlight
you're
of your
because
little.
you're in Dallas, right? Or
Yeah, we're in Dallas Fort
yeah,
Worth.
so
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's only about 5 hours from
Yeah,
Dallas
I'd
to
love
Little
to. If
Rock.
you guys would have Miss, I'd love to go and film some content and do a little tour of your manufacturing area.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. So what do you collect? I saw it looked like you had an Explorer 2 on your
So
wrist.
this I
Oh, really? That's sub. Okay.
so for me, I love the conversions that we do, um, but there's this saying, "Don't get high on your own supply."
Yeah.
So, um, I try my best to not keep all the watches that we work on, right? Because it can form a nucleation point because all of these pieces are awesome.
Yeah.
And so I have a collection of some vintage American, and then the other watches that I have all have unique, kind of like historical ways that I can connect with them. Like so, this is vintage Submariner. It's
Hmm.
birth year Submariner. So it's that cliche birth year sub.
Yep.
But so it was 1987, and this one's super unique because it was sold in Paris, France, on New Year's Eve in 1987, and it has the paperwork and like the original sales receipt
Yeah.
that backs all that up, and that makes me feel connection to it, just like my connection to Chicago and my favorite watch manufacturer being Burlington. And then for on my wife's side of the family, they have a tradition where if your birthday ends in zero, they will typically you'll get a watch to commemorate that. So my father-in-law gave me a really nice Breitling timepiece that I also
Mm.
feel that type of connection, carrying on that family tradition. So my timepieces that I collect pretty broad. I don't discriminate between Swiss or American, but really the ones that I like to keep and collect are ones that I can have some type of a connection to, typically through like some historic component.
Yeah, you're my kind of collector, dude. Because yeah, I've got a couple watches, that kind of come in and out, but the core group of everything, and I think it should be this way for every collector. I mean, we know plenty of guys that just are flexing with the most expensive
Yeah,
watch I can possibly get, right?
and that's
But
goofy,
but
but I mean, I guess
it is. I mean, why are you doing that? The reason that we love these things is because you can form connections to them, or because there's an intrinsic history that like you want to be a part of. And that's I came to vintage watches from the authorized dealer side of stuff. And I always loved watches, but with a new watch, you're buying the watch and you're like, okay, I'm gonna make my own stories with this. With the vintage stuff, whether it's an old watch you grab from the watch preserve, or a restored American pocket watch you get from Brendan, or even just a random eBay Hamilton find or something, you're adding on to history and you're becoming part of this legacy of this watch that's been around much longer than any of us have been alive, at least in our age group here. So it's really amazing, and I love that you've sort of built the ethos of your company on that sort of same principle.
yeah, and I think that that's really why people are so interested in these things because of that connection. And like you said, carrying on like the story of the piece, right? Because you have that rich history, and then you're able to take that and then make it your own.
Yeah, 100%. Well, hey, Brendan, I'm getting close to having to open the store up here in the next couple minutes.
Sure.
So just in wrapping up, I mean, where can the people find you? You have an excellent website. You guys are on social media still, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. So we have a Instagram page and also a Facebook page. If you just search our company name, Frett Co Clockworks, you should be able to find Instagram, Facebook, and then also our website. So I'm not sure if you can link that somehow, but it should be pretty easy to
Yeah,
find
well,
if you search our name.
yeah, we'll throw a link up in the description for the podcast, and some images of the beautiful watches that you guys
Oh,
work
yeah,
on.
that
So
sounds great.
yeah. Hey, Brendan, thank you so much for your time this morning, man. It was a real pleasure to chat with you. I would love to see some of your watches in person. Who
Yeah.
knows? Maybe we can even, if you want a brick and mortar, maybe we can even show some of them up here in the shop.
Yeah, I'd be
But
happy
maybe a little
to.
trip to Little Rock at some point. Do you ever
No, we're
go
not.
to like shows or anything like NAWCC or like Wind Up or anything?
No, I haven't really gone to much shows. But that would be a great place, right? Obviously, if you're there to formally meet you and to kind of meet some other, I guess, watch enthusiasts. Because yeah, we really haven't taken advantage of that yet, and that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean the watch space is so driven off of social media, but just in the past like 10 years, the meetup scenes, especially with stuff like Wind Up, from Worn Around. You should go to the one in Chicago because I mean, that's your home turf and that's one of the
Yeah.
largest of the year.
When does
Um,
that? Do you know when that one?
that's in July
In
of
July.
this year,
Okay,
I believe. Yeah.
that's a very nice time to visit Chicago too.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Summers in Chicago are enjoyable. Uh,
Yeah.
That's one of the hard things living in Little Rock for me to adjust to the summers down here.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's humid
So,
and awful. And so, if anybody is going to go to Wind Up Chicago, for your personal recommendation, what is the one restaurant that they should visit while they're there?
so I would say I'm into pizza. So my favorite pizza place there is Lou Malnati's.
Okay.
So I would say definitely hit that up. Go to Portillo's, get a Chicago style hot dog as well. Um, and yeah, those two places I would say definitely hit up.
All right, guys, you heard it here from the recommendations from the expert, from the local guy. So, hey, Brendan, thank you so much again for talking. It was a real pleasure, man. And
Yeah, of
hopefully we'll see
course.
each other soon.
All right. Yeah. Take care, man.